Greetings, and welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Ozark history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. We want to know which locations these recorded stories reach, as well as when time of day or night they occur. It was 1862. The Civil War was a terrible battle that was tearing the country apart. However, a different kind of horror was taking place in the isolated Ozark Mountains, one that would be mostly forgotten for almost a century. This is a story about a darkness that grew in seclusion, away from the prying eyes of civilized civilization, rather than about valor on the battlefield or political scheming. Based on judicial archives, military letters, newspaper clippings, personal journals, and archaeological evidence, all of which remained dispersed and unconnected until they were finally cataloged by Missouri State University academics in 1963. What follows is a painstaking reconstruction of events. The locations and timeline are true to the recorded record, although some names have been changed to protect descendants who are currently living in the area. There was a dangerous chaos among the Ozarks in 1862. Its inhabitants, who placed a high importance on privacy and self-sufficiency, had traditionally been rather independent due to the rough terrain. This already remote area became even more cut off from outside authorities when the Civil War broke out. The mountains became a patchwork of conflicting allegiances, neither entirely Confederate nor Union. Once sharing neighbors now looked at one another suspiciously. Both forces conducted routine patrols around the region, interrogating loyalties and requisitioning supplies. With each voyage, the dirt roads that connected Springfield to the tiny communities dotted across these mountains turned into perilous routes where people risked their lives. The collapse of civic authority was most felt in Taney County, which is located in the center of the Missouri Ozarks. In July 1861, military activities had torched the county seat of Forsyth, essentially suspending local governance. Law enforcement was essentially non-existent as the county sheriff and the majority of deputies had enlisted in the war. At best, court records from this time period are incomplete, mostly consisting of hurriedly scrawled entries in ledgers that were frequently moved from place to place as officials escaped approaching armies on both sides. This lack of authority created the ideal environment for predators to function covertly. Ezekiel Holloway bought a 160-acre estate on the White River in 1848, according to land records that academics looked at in the 1960s. The property was located about 23 miles south of Springfield, close to what is now Forsyth, at a key point when the major route from Springfield swung down from the highlands toward Arkansas. Given their alleged poor beginnings in eastern Tennessee, the purchase price, which was described as high in Dr. Eleanor Whitfield's 1964 monograph, raised concerns about the family's financial stability. Later, this disparity would be seen as the first clue that the Holloways might have been involved in illegal activity before coming to Missouri. A spacious two-story log cabin with a stone chimney, a smokehouse made of thick lumber and river rock, a barn big enough to house 8 horses, and a number of lesser outbuildings grouped in a rough semicircle around a central yard made up the Holloway homestead. Despite their limited involvement in the local economy, the Holloways appear to have enjoyed considerable wealth, as evidenced by tax assessments from 1859 that valued the land far higher than nearby farms. One oddity that Dr. Whitfield pointed out was that there were no records of animal sales or crop production that matched the farm's size and seeming success. This discrepancy would eventually take on ominous implications. Ezekiel Holloway, who was roughly 53 years old in 1862 based on census data, his wife Martha, who was thought to be in her mid-40s, 3 sons, Jeremiah, 26, Silas, and 17, and 2 daughters, Ruth, 19, and Esther. 15 made up the Holloway family. Although there are no records of Ezekiel's first marriage or its breakup, a notation in the 1850 census shows that Martha was his second wife. Since all of the children are identified as Ezekiel's children, it is possible that Martha was the stepmother of at least the elder ones. The family's attendance at religious events during their first 2 years in the area is listed in church records from a Baptist congregation near Forsyth, but after 1850, their names are removed. Concerns concerning the Holloway family's lack of participation in worship and fellowship are mentioned in a notation in the church ledger found during Dr. Whitfield's investigation, but it doesn't elaborate on the source of these worries. In later places where the family settled, this pattern of initial integration followed by withdrawal would recur. Neighbors' comments following the discovery of the Holloway's actions are the main source of descriptions. One of the few modern descriptions can be found in a statement made in 1863 by Thomas Wilkins, whose farm was around 3 miles from the Holloway property. They kept mostly to themselves, but Ezekiel would come to town for supplies every few weeks. Always polite, paid in good coin. Martha and the girls might come once or twice a year for cloth and such. The boys I saw less often. Strong-looking fellows didn't talk much. Nothing about them that would make you take particular notice. Sarah Thornton, whose husband ran a general store in Forsyth prior to the war, offered a slightly different viewpoint in a letter to her sister that was found in family documents given to the Missouri Historical Society in 1959. In 1867, William Cartwright, who delivered mail along the Springfield-Forsyth route before the war interrupted regular service, recalled that the Holloway property always seemed oddly quiet for a working farm. The Holloway man comes to the store perhaps once a month, always with good silver to pay for his purchases. The wife I have seen only twice in 5 years, a thin, severe woman who speaks little. The daughters stay close to her side, eyes downcast. I find it curious that despite having a substantial farm, they never bring produce or livestock to trade as other farmers do. Mr. Thornton says they are simply private folk, but something in the old man's gaze makes me uneasy. Most homesteads you'd pass, there'd be the sounds of animals, children playing, work being done. The Holloway place was different, quiet in a way that made the back of your neck prickle. I delivered letters there maybe half a dozen times over 3 years. The old man would always be waiting at the road as if he knew I was coming. Never invited me to approach the house proper. I noticed they got few letters themselves, and those mostly seemed to be from Tennessee or Arkansas. A pivotal moment in the war's Western theater, the Battle of Pea Ridge in March 1862, had a big impact on the Ozark region. Although a Union victory guaranteed Missouri to the north, the region saw a surge in the flow of troops, refugees, and displaced citizens. The route passing the Holloway property was frequently used by military supply wagons and by individuals looking for safer places or trying to get back in touch with relatives. Documents retrieved at the Taney County Courthouse indicate that the first recorded disappearances started at this exact moment. Between April and November of 1862, at least 17 travelers were reported missing along the 20-mile stretch of road where the Holloway property was located, according to county records. The reports themselves are brief, frequently including only of the last known location, name, and approximate date of disappearance. However, military correspondence recovered from Union archives in 1965 refers to suspicious circumstances regarding civilian movement in the area, but with battles raging across Missouri and Arkansas, these reports received scant attention from authorities overwhelmed by the demands of war. Another disappearance near the White River crossing is noted in the county sheriff's logbook dated June 12, 1862, but it is noted that, with the present hostilities, investigation must be deferred. Jonathan Myers, a 42-year-old Springfield merchant who departed the city on April 23, 1862, to inspect circumstances at his warehouse in Batesville, Arkansas, was one of those listed as missing. When he didn't return in the anticipated amount of time, his business partner reported him missing. Although no additional evidence was ever located, a cavalry patrol claimed to have spotted a guy who fit his description on the route close to the White River crossing. Among the items found on the Holloway property were personal belongings that were later determined to be Myers. The Ballard family, Samuel, 35, Elizabeth, 32, and their kids, William, 9, and Mary, 6, was also reported missing. They were heading north from their farm near Batesville after it was damaged during military operations. The family had intended to stay with relatives close to Springfield, according to later testimony from Batesville neighbors. Early in June 1862, they were last observed traveling through Forsyth. Elizabeth Ballard's sister later identified children's clothing items found on the Holloway farm as belonging to William and Mary. The story of Emma Whitaker, a 19-year-old schoolteacher who had worked in a small community close to Harrison, Arkansas, was arguably the most moving. She set out to return to her family in Springfield after the war forced the school to close. Emma had wrote that she had obtained passage with a teamster heading north and was anticipated to arrive by mid-July, according to a letter from her father to military authorities dated July 18, 1862. When she didn't show up, the letter was written in a desperate attempt to find out where she was. Among the personal belongings found in the Holloway residence was a locket that had a miniature portrait that her father had determined to be Emma's. Not only is the number of disappearances in this case highly alarming, but investigators would subsequently find that the disappearances were systematic. Not all travelers were killed by the Holloways. They treated them with the same meticulous care that they gave to cattle. They called their victims provisions and chose them on the basis of size and apparent health, according to a journal found in the chimney in 1957 behind a loose stone. This journal, which is currently housed in the Missouri State Archives under restricted access, has about 40 entries covering an 18-month period. Based on paper composition and ink analysis, academic researchers have dated the journal to approximately 1861 to 1862. However, entries include unsettling notations like male, approximately 30 years, good condition, yielded 67 pounds of usable product, and female, older, less satisfactory yield, but bones made excellent stock. A brief description of the person, the date of acquisition, the processing method, and the yield notation are all included in the same way for every entry. Even seasoned researchers were taken aback by the clinical distance displayed in these entries. One particularly troubling feature of the journal is its indication that the Holloways developed specific techniques for different categories of victims. Dr. Theodore Montgomery of the Smithsonian Institution, who studied the journal as part of his analysis of remains recovered from the site, wrote in his report that the precision and dispassion of the record-keeping suggests a complete moral disconnection from the humanity of the victims. The entries might as well describe the butchering of cattle or hogs. One entry from January 1862 reads, "Winter preservation method using snowpack and salt proves superior to previous attempts. Sample from November remains in excellent condition after 60 days. Another entry from September 1861 states, "Young male subjects provide optimal ratio of muscle to fat. Processing should commence within 4 hours of acquisition to ensure quality." Even in the best of circumstances, the Ozarks White River region was remote in 1862. Isolation was almost total during the conflict, with regular postal service interrupted and movement restricted by military checkpoints. The few families that remained in the region were dispersed throughout the untamed territory. with miles of thick forest and steep hills separating each homestead from its neighbors. This made it possible for the Holloway's operations to go months without anyone noticing. The Holloways portrayed themselves as kind natives who provided refuge to travelers going through unstable areas, according to a deposition made in 1863 by Jacob Cranston, one of the few tourists to meet the family and survive. I came upon their place near sunset, Cranston wrote in his military intelligence report narrative. The old man, Ezekiel he called himself, was splitting wood in the yard and offered me supper and a place to sleep in the barn. Said the roads weren't safe to travel after dark, what with deserters and bushwhackers about. Cranston's account continues. During the meal, they seemed mighty interested in which direction I was headed and who might be expecting me. When I mentioned I was just passing through with no particular destination, something in the old man's eyes changed. I felt a chill despite the fire blazing in the hearth. The younger daughter served the meal, some kind of stew, but ate nothing herself, which I found curious. The mother and older daughter remained in the kitchen area, watching but saying little. The sons spoke among themselves in low tones I couldn't make out. After the meal, Cranston excused himself to tend to his horse in the barn, where he overheard a whispered conversation between two of the Holloway sons about preparing the smokehouse and checking the hooks. Feeling uneasy, he slipped away during the night, leaving behind his saddle and pack rather than risk alerting the family. After over 2 days of walking, he came across a Union patrol and informed them of his suspicions. Although his report was filed, it wasn't looked into until the conflict was over. A second, less thorough but no less disturbing narrative is found in a letter that Mary Whittam wrote in September 1862 to her brother in St. Louis. Our journey south was delayed when one of our wagon wheels broke near a river crossing. A family living nearby offered assistance, the father and sons helping to repair the damage while the mother and daughters provided a meal. The children were struck by how little the daughters spoke, and later told me they had seen what appeared to be bloodstains on the back of one girl's apron. I attributed this to normal farm butchery, but my husband later remarked that for a farm with apparently prosperous owners, there was a curious absence of livestock visible in the yards or pastures. We continued our journey as soon as repairs were completed, my husband encouraging haste, despite the late hour. It wasn't these fleeting suspicions or the missing pattern that ultimately drew attention to the Holloway property, but rather an accidental finding. A group of Confederate guerrillas were known to be active in the region in December 1862, and a Union cavalry patrol under the command of Lieutenant Samuel Whitaker was pursuing them. They were compelled to seek shelter during a winter storm and discovered the seemingly deserted Holloway property. Whitaker's December 18, 1862, report states that what they discovered was incomprehensible to men who had seen the cruelty of combat. As was typical of official military correspondence of the time, the report itself is sparse in its specifics, but it makes reference to human remains in various states of preservation and evidence of systematic processing that no decent mind could imagine. Sergeant James McPherson's personal letter to his brother in Illinois, which was eventually given to the Missouri Historical Society in 1958, provides a more thorough narrative. The place appeared deserted when we arrived, though the chimney still held warmth, suggesting the occupants had fled not long before. What we discovered as we searched for supplies made the hair stand on my neck. The smokehouse contained meat of a sort that, upon closer inspection, was determined not to be from any conventional livestock. Several barrels in the cellar held preserved portions in brine that no man among us could look upon without revulsion. McPherson's letter continues. In the barn, we found personal effects that could only have belonged to numerous different individuals. Watches, rings, spectacles, boots, sorted and cataloged in a methodical fashion. Most disturbing was a trunk containing clothing of various sizes, including garments belonging to women and children, each folded neatly with a paper tag affixed, noting what appeared to be a date. Lieutenant Whitaker ordered these items collected as evidence, though what authority might investigate such matters in these chaotic times, I cannot say. The root cellar was the most unsettling of all. According to McPherson's note, what they found beneath the Holloway cabin will haunt me more than any battlefield I have seen. Human bones, picked clean and stacked like cordwood. Some showed signs of having been split open, presumably to extract the marrow. I counted remains from at least 9 individuals, though there may have been more. In one corner stood a large copper kettle, its interior stained in a manner I shall not describe. Various implements hung from hooks on the wall, saws, knives, cleavers, all showing signs of regular use and careful maintenance. One of our company, a man who had worked in his father's butcher shop before the war, observed with horror that the tools were arranged precisely as they would be in a professional slaughterhouse. A report by Private Thomas Jenkins, additional information in a journal entry dated December 19, 1862. What we found in that place has destroyed my faith in the inherent goodness of mankind. Beyond the tools and remains already noted by others, we discovered a small room adjoining the cellar that appeared to be where they prepared those they took. Iron rings set into the wall with chains attached. A drain in the center of the floor leading to a covered pit outside the foundation. Everything arranged for efficiency, like a well-organized farm operation. The thought that such preparations were made with deliberate care over time for the specific purpose of processing human beings, as if they were livestock, is more horrifying than any sudden violence I have witnessed in battle. The demands of combat hindered the military's ability to document the situation. The patrol burned the buildings to the ground and resumed their search for Confederate forces after retrieving what portable evidence they could carry, such as the ledger and a number of personal belongings thought to be those of missing passengers. After the present conflict is resolved, a thorough investigation should be conducted to determine the full extent of the atrocities committed at this location. Lieutenant Whitaker's report ends with this advice, but it would not be carried out for almost a century. In the turmoil of the Civil War, the Holloways themselves disappeared. Finding a single family, regardless of their misdeeds, was not a top priority for military or civilian authorities. Both sides had committed atrocities as the Missouri struggle had turned into a bloody guerrilla struggle. Despite its atrocities, the Holloway case was reduced to a mark in overcrowded record books against this backdrop of pervasive violence. Over the ensuing years, there were sporadic reports of similar disappearances near Shreveport, Louisiana, in 1866, and a family that fit their description was spotted in southern Arkansas in 1864, but nothing significant enough to warrant action. In July 1865, the Arkansas Gazette published a wanted notice offering a prize for information that would result in the capture of Ezekiel Holloway and his family, who had previously lived in Taney County, Missouri. It reads, "Wanted for questioning regarding disappearances, but no answers are documented." The case eventually lost governmental notice and was only mentioned in local folklore and sporadic documents. After the war, at least some officials may have been looking for the Holloways, according to one interesting document found in the Freedmen's Bureau archives in 1967. The Holloway family is known to have engaged in predatory activities in Missouri during the late conflict. The patriarch Ezekiel is described as tall and gaunt with a gray beard and cold demeanor. The family may have adopted an alias, but likely maintains its structure of father, mother, 3 sons, and 2 daughters. No follow-up reports have been found, indicating that the search was either abandoned or produced no results, as the Bureau concentrated on its primary mission of aiding freed slaves. Both civilian and military sources can be used to reconstruct the immediate aftermath of the discovery at the Holloway homestead. The atrocities described are of such a nature as to warrant investigation, but current military exigencies preclude allocation of resources to civilian criminal matters, however heinous. Colonel William McDowell, who commanded Union forces in the Springfield area, acknowledges receiving Lieutenant Whitaker's report in a dispatch. Information has been forwarded to appropriate authorities in St. Louis, though response is likely to be delayed due to ongoing hostilities. Brigadier General James Totten briefly mentions the case in a January 1863 letter to the Provost Marshal in St. Louis. The attached account of discoveries made by Lieutenant Whitaker's patrol stands out among the many reports of criminal activity facilitated by wartime conditions as particularly disturbing. While military authorities lack jurisdiction in this matter, I recommend that civilian authorities be notified to institute appropriate proceedings should the individuals in question be apprehended. No record of any such proceedings has been found, indicating that the information never led to any tangible action. After the Battle of Prairie Grove, the Missouri War had gotten more intense by early 1863, and civilian government had all but fallen apart in many places. Overwhelmed by cases directly related to the war effort, the St. Louis Provost Marshal's office seems to have filed the report without taking any further action. The story didn't come up again in intellectual circles until 1961. While conducting research for her PhD dissertation at the University of Arkansas on crimes during the Civil War, Dr. Eleanor Whitfield came across mentions of the Holloway case in soldier letters preserved at the National Archives. At first, her interest was solely scholarly. The Holloway case served as a stark illustration of how criminal activity may be made possible by the disintegration of civil society during times of war. But as she dug deeper into the records that were available, she started to have doubts that the Holloway's operations might have been much more extensive than first reported. Dr. Whitfield talked about her increasing interest in the case in an interview that was published in the Arkansas Historical Quarterly in 1962. Dr. Whitfield's subsequent investigation, which combined archival research with archaeological examination of the former Holloway property, revealed evidence that suggested the family's activities may have started years before the first official disappearances were noted and continued well beyond 1862. What started as a footnote in my broader research into crime during the Civil War period gradually emerged as something far more significant. The Holloway case offers a unique window into how completely moral structures can collapse under certain conditions. The family appears to have created its own internal value system entirely divorced from societal norms, maintaining a separate moral universe for years, while presenting a facade of normalcy to those they encountered casually. As early as 1854, county death records mentioned sporadic traveler disappearances in the White River region, but these were typically ascribed to banditry or accidents. More importantly, comparable disappearance patterns were found along what seemed to be the Holloway family's travel path after leaving their homestead in Missouri. There were many obstacles in the path of the Holloway property's archaeological investigation. After being burned in 1862, the area saw decades of erosion and forest regeneration before. Bull Shoals Lake was created in the 1950s, partially submerging it. In the summer of 1963, when lake levels were at their lowest, Dr. Whitfield obtained funds from the University of Arkansas and authorization from the Army Corps of Engineers to carry out small-scale excavations. The excavation conditions were far from ideal, said Dr. James Thornton, who oversaw the archaeological work at the University of Missouri. Much of the site is now permanently underwater, and what remains has been heavily disturbed by the construction of the dam and subsequent shoreline erosion. Nevertheless, we were able to locate the foundation of the main house and outbuildings, which corresponded precisely with the descriptions in Lieutenant Whitaker's report. Notwithstanding these difficulties, important discoveries were made throughout the excavation. The drainage system Private Jenkins described was part of the root cellar's mostly intact stone foundation. Iron shackles, hooks resembling those found in slaughterhouses, and pieces of fire-resistant tools were among the metal objects found. The human remains were the most important. From what had been the root cellar and smokehouse sections, bone fragments belonging to at least 23 people were found. Dr. Theodore Montgomery's examination of these remains at the Smithsonian Institution revealed unsettling details about the Holloway's methods. The bones exhibit clear evidence of systematic processing, according to Dr. Montgomery. Cut marks are consistent with butchery techniques used for livestock, made with sharp, well-maintained tools wielded by individuals with considerable experience. Many fragments show signs of having been exposed to smoke and heat, while others exhibit the characteristic staining associated with brine preservation. Dr. Montgomery's analysis also showed that the victims were representative of the traveling population at the time. Skeletal evidence indicate that the remains include of at least 2 adolescents between the ages of 10 and 15, as well as adult males and females between the ages of roughly 16 and 60. There were no remains of infants or small children found, though this could be due to disposal procedures rather than victim selection. The personal items found with the bodies were possibly the most horrifying. The meticulous collection and arrangement of buttons, hairpins, dentures, and other small objects in tiny wooden boxes suggested a ritualistic element to the murders that went beyond simple practicality. No researcher has been ready to openly quote what looked to be recipes and preparation instructions from a partially completed journal, its pages mostly unreadable from decades of exposure to the elements. In her monograph, Dr. Whitfield only acknowledged that the contents indicate a disturbing level of experimentation and refinement of techniques over time. Dr. Whitfield's investigation revealed a picture of a family that had devised a method for identifying, apprehending, and processing tourists with frightful efficiency. Her investigation revealed that the Holloways specifically targeted those who seemed to be traveling alone or in couples and were not likely to be immediately missed. In addition to providing hospitality, a vital resource in the remote Ozarks, they took advantage of the chance to evaluate possible victims. Although the Civil War's upheaval and the region's seclusion made for ideal cover for their operations, there was indications that they had been functioning on a smaller scale for years prior to the start of the conflict. They just had more possibilities and a lower chance of being discovered because of the war. Dr. Whitfield's additional investigation revealed alarming signs that the Holloway's operations in Missouri might have been an extension of methods started elsewhere. Records from Hancock County in eastern Tennessee, where the family is said to have come from, showed a similar trend of disappearances from 1843 to 1847. An investigation into a family named Holloway was mentioned in a sheriff's report from 1847 after neighbors complained about unusual activities, but it appears that the probe was dropped after the family moved out. Even though there was no concrete proof of wrongdoing, the report contains a neighbor's statement about smoke coming from their chimney at strange hours and strange sounds in the night. The possibility that the Holloways had developed their predation pattern before coming to Missouri gives the case a troubling twist. According to Dr. Whitfield, rather than representing an aberrant response to the chaos of civil war, their activities may have been a long-established practice temporarily facilitated by wartime conditions. This suggests a level of intergenerational transmission of deviant behavior rarely documented in historical cases. Several scholars have pointed out that the family's seeming normalization of their behavior within their own social group is a particularly concerning aspect of the case. Evidence points to a total moral reversal in the family system, with even the smallest children reportedly taking part in victim processing. One of the daughters is thought to have authored a diary entry that was found at the homestead, in which she discusses assisting in the preparation of the day's yield, as if talking about everyday farm tasks. Few criminologists have really examined this uncommon and terrifying phenomenon, the conversion of an entire family into what essentially served as a predatory creature. According to Dr. Robert Lancaster of Vanderbilt University, who performed a retrospective psychological evaluation using the historical documents at hand, Ezekiel Holloway most likely displayed traits that contemporary psychiatrists would categorize as antisocial personality disorder. The methodical nature of the killings. According to Lancaster in 1966, the apparent lack of remorse as evidenced by the continued practice over years and the involvement of the entire family unit suggests a patriarch with extraordinary power to influence or intimidate those around him. The record suggests Ezekiel Holloway created a closed system of morality within his family, where normal social prohibitions were replaced by a utilitarian view of human life as merely another resource. The subject of how a full family could take part in such activities is also included in Dr. Lancaster's assessment. Different degrees of involvement are usually present in historical incidents of family-based criminal activity, with some members acting as mute witnesses or hesitant accomplices, and others as active participants. All of the evidence suggests that every member of the family, including the younger ones, participated fully in the Holloway case, which makes it unique. This points to either extreme patriarchal pressure or total indoctrination into a different moral system where the behaviors were accepted from a young age. What happened to the Holloway family when they left their homestead in December 1862 is still unknown. Dr. Whitfield's investigation found up intriguing hints that they might have carried on their operations in other places. The Holloways' ages and first names are comparable to those of a family named Holland in northeastern Texas, according to 1870 census records, and local newspapers from the region indicate disappearances that like those in the Ozarks. There is a recurring pattern. Choosing a remote spot along a route, establishing a farmhouse with particular architectural features, and then going missing for a number of years. When construction workers extending Highway 63 in Hardy, Arkansas, discovered a mass grave in 1968 that contained the remains of at least 11 people, it was the last tangible proof of their operations. The remains were dated to roughly 1867 to 1869, according to analysis, and some of them had the same unique butchery signs as those discovered at the Holloway Homestead in Missouri. Although all participants are assumed dead, the Holloway case file in the Missouri State Archives is still open and technically unsolved. Perhaps the Holloway case's most lasting legacy is its demonstration of how easily, in the appropriate situations, the facade of civilization may be torn away. In the remote hollows of the Ozarks, where society was collapsing due to civil war, the Holloways established their own moral universe in which human life was solely valuable as a resource to be used for profit. Their tale serves as a sobering reminder of the evil that may arise when isolation, opportunity, and a basic lack of respect for human decency come together. In a place where hospitality is still a source of pride, the Holloway case serves as a somber counterpoint, a reminder that sometimes an invitation to supper can conceal the most sinister of intentions. As one elderly Taney County resident told Dr. Whitfield, "The Holloways are gone, but remembering what they did might just make folks a bit more careful about who they trust and where they stop when traveling these hills."